The stagecoach rattled to a stop in a cloud of dust, its wooden wheels groaning under the weight of a journey that had stretched over 1,000 miles. Cordelia Lambert clutched her small carpetbag with white-knuckled fingers, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild bird trapped in a cage. Through the grimy window, she caught her first glimpse of Vulture City, Arizona, a collection of sun-bleached buildings scattered across the desert landscape like discarded playing cards. The year was 1883, and at 22 years old, Cordelia had never been farther from her Boston home than the neighboring state of New Hampshire. Now here she was, in the unforgiving Arizona territory, about to meet the man she had agreed to marry through a series of carefully penned letters. "End of the line, miss," the coach driver called, his voice rough as sandpaper. "Vulture City. What's left of it, anyway?" Cordelia adjusted her bonnet, tucked a stray copper curl behind her ear, and gathered her courage. The mining town had once boomed with gold fever, but the rush had slowed in recent years. Still, her soon-to-be husband, Nathan Sterling, had written that his cattle ranch just outside town was thriving, and he needed a wife to help build a proper home. As she stepped down from the coach, the dry heat hit her like a physical force, sucking the moisture from her skin in an instant. Her traveling dress, fashionable in Boston, felt absurdly heavy and constraining in this furnace-like air. She blinked against the harsh sunlight, momentarily blinded. When her vision cleared, she realized with a sinking feeling that a small crowd had gathered to witness her arrival. Word had evidently spread that Sterling's mail-order bride was arriving today. "That's her." A woman's shrill voice cut through the afternoon air. "Lord Almighty, she's as red as a summer tomato already." A ripple of laughter spread through the onlookers. Cordelia's pale skin, which had already begun to burn during the short exposure to the sun, flushed deeper with humiliation. "Sterling said she was a proper Boston lady," a man chortled. "Bet she ain't never seen a rattler or shoveled horse manure." "She won't last a week," called another. Cordelia stood frozen, clutching her bag to her chest like armor. In Boston, she had been considered plain but respectable, the daughter of a bookkeeper who had died leaving nothing but debts. Her mother had followed him to the grave shortly after, consumed by grief and illness. With no prospects and no family, answering Mr. Sterling's advertisement had seemed like her only option. Now, as the laughter continued, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. "That's enough." The voice was low and steady, cutting through the mockery like a knife. The crowd parted, and a tall figure stepped forward. Cordelia's breath caught in her throat. Nathan Sterling was not what she had expected. His letters had been straightforward and businesslike, revealing little about the man himself. Now, standing before her was a man of perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a storm-darkened sky. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar, and a short beard shadowed his jawline. He wore simple clothes, dusty trousers, a blue cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up revealing powerful forearms, and a worn leather vest. "Miss Lambert?" he asked, and there was something in his gaze that made the laughter of the crowd fade to insignificance. Cordelia straightened her spine. "Mr. Sterling." He stepped closer, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that surprised her. "Welcome to Vulture City." "I apologize for the reception committee. Folks here don't get much entertainment." There was no smile on his face, but his eyes held something that might have been admiration. "Thank you for meeting me," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. Nathan nodded, then turned to address the lingering spectators. "Show's over, folks. Miss Lambert's had a long journey." The crowd began to disperse, though not without a few additional snickers and whispered comments. Nathan retrieved Cordelia's trunk from the stagecoach, lifting the heavy luggage with apparent ease. "My wagon's over there," he said, gesturing with his chin. "It's about an hour's ride to the ranch." As they crossed the dusty street, the whispers followed them. "Poor Sterling, getting saddled with that one. Skinny as a rail and red as a beet. Too fancy for her own good. You can tell she's never worked a day in her life." Cordelia kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, pretending not to hear, though each comment stung like a slap. In Boston, she had worked as a seamstress after her father's death, her fingers constantly pricked and raw from endless hours of detailed work. These people knew nothing about her. When they reached the wagon, Nathan set her trunk in the back and then turned to help her up to the seat. His hands were strong and calloused as they circled her waist, lifting her with surprising gentleness. "Don't mind them," he said quietly, once he had settled beside her and taken up the reins. "They judge what they don't understand." The simple statement, delivered without condescension, loosened something tight in Cordelia's chest. She glanced at his profile as he guided the horses through town. His expression revealed little, but there was a steadiness to him that she found reassuring. "Your letters didn't mention quite how lively the local reception might be," she ventured. For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Didn't want to scare you off." He paused. "Though maybe I should have warned you about the heat. That bonnet won't do much good out here." "I'm beginning to realize that much of my wardrobe may be unsuitable," she admitted. As they left the town behind, the landscape opened up before them, vast and rugged, unlike anything Cordelia had ever seen. Rocky outcroppings punctuated the desert, and in the distance, mountains rose like sentinels against the impossibly blue sky. Saguaro cacti stood like strange guardians across the terrain, their arms raised as if in welcome or warning. "It's beautiful," she whispered, despite herself. Nathan glanced at her, surprise evident in his expression. "Most Easterners don't see it that way, at least not at first. It's fierce," she said, searching for the right word. "Uncompromising, but there's something honest about that." He studied her for a moment longer before returning his attention to the trail. "That's one way of looking at it." They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic clop of the horses' hooves and the creak of the wagon wheels the only sounds. Cordelia's mind raced with questions. What would his ranch be like? Would there be a proper house, or would they live in some primitive cabin? And most pressing, what kind of man had she agreed to marry? As if reading her thoughts, Nathan spoke. "I should tell you now, the house isn't much. I've been focusing on building the herd and the land, but it's solid, and there's room to expand." "I understand," she said, though in truth, she had little concept of what ranch life would entail. Her letters had detailed her skills cooking, sewing, basic household management, but had those been enough to prepare her for this place? "And about our arrangement," he continued, his voice carefully neutral. "I know the usual practice is to have the ceremony right away, but I think we should take some time. Get to know each other a bit. Make sure this is what you want." Cordelia turned to look at him, startled. "But the agreement?" "The agreement was that you'd come west to be my wife," he said. "But I won't hold you to it if you decide this isn't the life for you, or if I'm not the man you thought you were corresponding with." The unexpected consideration in his words left her momentarily speechless. In Boston, she had been given no choices. Here, at the edge of civilization, this stranger was offering her something no one else had the chance to decide her own fate. "Thank you," she said softly. "That's more than fair." He nodded once, his eyes still on the trail ahead. But in that brief exchange, something shifted between them, a tentative trust beginning to form. As the wagon crested a small rise, Nathan drew the horses to a halt. "There it is," he said. "Sterling Ranch." Below them, Nestled in a shallow valley with a creek running through it, stood a modest homestead. A single-story house with a porch, a large barn, several corrals, and a bunkhouse made up the main compound. Beyond, Cordelia could see cattle grazing on the sparse vegetation that somehow managed to survive in this harsh environment. It was nothing like the grand estates of Massachusetts, but against the backdrop of the rugged landscape, it held its own kind of dignity. "It's yours now, too," Nathan said quietly, "if you choose to stay." As the wagon began its descent toward the ranch, Cordelia felt the weight of that choice. She had traveled across a continent based on the promise of security in exchange for becoming a stranger's wife. Now that stranger was offering her something unexpected: respect. She looked again at Nathan Sterling's profile, stern but not unkind, and for the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, she felt a flicker of hope that perhaps she hadn't made a terrible mistake after all. The ranch house was simple but sturdy, built of adobe with a wooden porch that wrapped around two sides. As they approached, a dog came bounding out to meet them, a rangy black and white border collie that barked once in greeting before circling the wagon excitedly. "That's Scout," Nathan said as he drew the horses to a stop. "Best cattle dog in the territory." The dog wagged its tail furiously at the sound of its name, looking up at Cordelia with intelligent eyes. She couldn't help but smile. "Hello, Scout." A weathered man in his 60s emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. His face was deeply lined from years under the Arizona sun, but his eyes were sharp and curious as they landed on Cordelia. "This is Frank Daniels," Nathan explained. "He's been with me since I started the ranch." "Foreman and right-hand man." "Madam," Frank said, touching the brim of his hat. "Welcome to Sterling Ranch." "Thank you," Cordelia replied, pleased to receive a civil greeting after the town's reception. Nathan helped her down from the wagon, his hands firm but gentle around her waist. Up close, she realized how much taller he was, nearly a foot above her own 5'3". She felt small beside him, but not frightened. "Frank, can you see to the horses? I'll show Miss Lambert the house." "Sure thing, boss." The older man took the reins, giving Cordelia a friendly nod. Nathan retrieved her trunk and led the way to the house, Scout trotting alongside them. The porch creaked slightly under their weight and he paused at the door. "It's not much," he said again, a hint of apology in his tone, "but it's clean." He pushed open the door to reveal a simple but tidy main room that served as both kitchen and living area. A solid oak table with 4 chairs sat in one corner, a cast iron stove in another. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and there were 2 worn but comfortable-looking armchairs placed before it. Sunlight filtered through clean windows, illuminating the simple furnishings. "The bedroom's through there," Nathan said, gesturing to a door on the far wall. "It's yours." "I've been sleeping in the bunkhouse with the hands, and I'll continue to do so until—" He cleared his throat. "Until we decide on more permanent arrangements." Cordelia felt heat rise to her cheeks at the implication, but she appreciated his discretion. "That's very considerate, Mr. Sterling." "Nathan," he corrected. "If we're going to get to know each other, we might as well use our given names." "Nathan," she repeated, testing the feel of it on her tongue. "And please call me Cordelia." He nodded, then carried her trunk into the bedroom. Cordelia followed, taking in the simple furnishings: a bed with a quilt in blues and browns, a small dresser, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a narrow wardrobe. Like the main room, it was plain but clean. "I'll let you get settled," Nathan said, setting down her trunk. "Supper's usually at sundown. Frank does most of the cooking, but I told him I'd handle it tonight. Nothing fancy, mind you." "I could help," Cordelia offered quickly. "Cooking is one of the skills I mentioned in my letters." A hint of surprise crossed his features. "You're not too tired from your journey. I've been sitting for days," she admitted. "It would be good to do something useful." He studied her for a moment, then gave a slight nod. "All right, I'll come get you in about an hour." Once alone, Cordelia sank onto the edge of the bed, the reality of her situation finally settling over her. She was thousands of miles from everything familiar, in the home of a man she barely knew, preparing to possibly spend the rest of her life in this wild place. She moved to the small window. Outside, she could see Nathan crossing to the barn, his stride long and purposeful. In the corral beyond, several horses grazed peacefully. Further out, cattle dotted the landscape, small dark shapes against the golden grassland. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ranch, painting everything in rich hues of amber and russet. It was nothing like Boston with its crowded streets and brick buildings. Here, space stretched in every direction, seemingly endless. The air itself tasted different, clean and sharp, tinged with sage and dust. Cordelia opened her trunk and began unpacking, grimacing as she laid out her city clothes. The heavy fabrics and formal styles were ridiculously impractical for ranch life. She would need to adapt quickly if she were to survive here. From the bottom of the trunk, she pulled out her most treasured possession, a small framed daguerreotype of her parents taken shortly after their wedding. Her father, stern but kind-eyed, and her mother, beautiful and serene. She placed it carefully on the dresser, a small piece of her past in this strange new world. An hour later, a knock at the bedroom door announced Nathan's return. Cordelia had changed into her simplest dress, a cotton print in a soft blue that at least offered more freedom of movement than her traveling outfit. She had also removed her bonnet and pinned her copper hair in a simpler style. Nathan's eyes swept over her briefly. "Ready to try your hand at Western cooking?" "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied with a small smile. The kitchen was stocked with basic supplies: flour, salt, sugar, coffee, beans, and an array of canned goods. A root cellar beneath the house held potatoes, onions, and a few other vegetables that could withstand the Arizona heat. In a small smokehouse behind the kitchen, Nathan showed her the hanging sides of beef and pork. "We slaughter a steer about once a month," he explained. "Trade with neighbors for pork now and then. Got chickens too, for eggs mostly." Together they prepared a simple meal: beef stew with potatoes and carrots and a pan of cornbread. As they worked, Cordelia found herself relaxing slightly. Nathan wasn't much for conversation, but his silence wasn't uncomfortable. He moved with efficiency, clearly accustomed to cooking for himself. "Where did you learn to cook?" she asked as she kneaded the cornbread batter. "My mother taught me the basics," he said. "After she died, I was on my own a lot. My father was, not much for domestic tasks." "I'm sorry about your mother," Cordelia said softly. "I lost both of my parents recently. It's difficult." Nathan's eyes met hers, and for a moment she glimpsed something behind his reserved exterior, a shared understanding of grief. "It is," he agreed simply. As the stew simmered, Nathan showed her the rest of the ranch. The barn housed 4 working horses and Nathan's personal mount, a powerful black gelding named Diablo. The chicken coop held a dozen hens and 1 rooster who eyed Cordelia suspiciously. A small kitchen garden struggled valiantly against the climate, producing a modest crop of tomatoes and peppers. "The creek provides enough water for the house and stock," Nathan explained as they walked along its banks. "Doesn't run dry, even in summer. That's rare out here, and it's what makes this land workable." "How long have you had the ranch?" Cordelia asked, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. 6 years, he replied. "Came west after the war with what was left of my family money and bought this land when nobody wanted it. Started with 20 head of cattle and one broken-down horse. There was quiet pride in his voice. Now I've got nearly 300 head and a breeding program that's starting to get noticed. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in spectacular shades of orange and pink when they returned to the house. Frank joined them for dinner, and to Cordelia's relief, he made easy conversation, telling stories about the early days of the ranch that occasionally drew a rare smile from Nathan. The boss here didn't know a branding iron from a fireplace poker when he started, Frank chuckled. First time he tried to rope a calf, he ended up dragging himself through a cactus patch. Nathan shook his head, but there was amusement in his eyes. Frank conveniently forgets that he wasn't much better when he was green. I've heard stories from other ranchers. The easy camaraderie between the two men spoke of years of trust and shared hardship. It was a side of Nathan that hadn't been apparent in his letters, this capacity for loyalty and friendship. After dinner, Frank excused himself to check on the cattle once more before turning in. Cordelia and Nathan sat on the porch, watching as stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. Scout lay at Nathan's feet, occasionally thumping his tail against the wooden boards. "It's beautiful," Cordelia murmured, gazing up at the vast expanse of stars more than she had ever seen in Boston, where city lights dimmed the night sky. "One of the reasons I stay," Nathan admitted. "Even on the hardest days when drought threatens the herd or wolves take down a calf. The night sky reminds me how small our troubles really are." They sat in companionable silence for a while longer before Nathan spoke again. "Tomorrow I'll show you more of the ranch operations. If you're to be part of this place, you should understand how it works. If not when," Cordelia noted. He was still giving her the choice. "I'd like that," she said. "I have much to learn. We start early here," he warned. "Sunrise." "I'll be ready." As they rose to go inside, Nathan hesitated. "Cordelia," he said, her name sounding different in his deep voice. "I want you to know that whatever you decide about staying, you're safe here. I gave my word in those letters and I stand by it." The simple declaration, spoken without flourish or expectation, touched her deeply. "Thank you, Nathan." Later, lying in her new bed in the quiet darkness, Cordelia reflected on the day's events. The cruel welcome in town contrasted sharply with the respectful reception at the ranch. Nathan Sterling was not what she had expected, neither the refined gentleman she had naively hoped for, nor the rough, demanding husband she had feared. He was something else entirely, a man of few words but clear principles, who had carved a life out of this harsh land through sheer determination. A man who looked at her not with disappointment or mockery, but with a quiet assessment that made her feel seen rather than judged. As sleep claimed her, Cordelia's last thought was that perhaps, against all odds, she might find a place for herself in this wild, beautiful country, not just as Nathan Sterling's wife, but as a woman in her own right. The morning arrived with startling swiftness, the first rays of sunlight streaming through the uncurtained window. For a disorienting moment, Cordelia didn't recognize her surroundings. Then memory returned, and with it a flutter of both anxiety and anticipation. She dressed quickly in her plainest skirt and shirtwaist, pinning her hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. By the time she emerged from the bedroom, Nathan had already built a fire in the stove and was brewing coffee. "Morning," he said, handing her a steaming cup. "Sleep well." "Better than I expected," she admitted. The bed had been surprisingly comfortable after days of sleeping upright in stage coaches and drafty hotels. Breakfast was a simple affair of bacon, eggs, and biscuits left by Frank before he'd headed out to check on a heifer that was due to calve. As they ate, Nathan outlined the day ahead. "Thought I'd show you the operation, how we run things, what the daily work looks like. Might not be what you're used to. I want to learn, Cordelia assured him. In Boston, after my father died, I worked as a seamstress, long hours in poor conditions. I'm not afraid of hard work. Nathan's eyebrows rose slightly. You didn't mention that in your letters. I wasn't sure it would be considered proper, she admitted. Many men prefer a wife without a working past. Out here, everyone works, he said matter-of-factly. The land demands it. No room for idleness. After breakfast, they stepped out into the golden morning light. The ranch was already alive with activity. Two ranch hands were breaking a young horse in one of the corrals, the animal bucking and snorting as it resisted the saddle. Frank was emerging from the barn with a bucket, heading toward the chicken coop. "Morning, Miss Lambert," he called. "Hope you're ready for a proper Arizona education." Nathan brought a horse from the stable, a gentle chestnut mare named Penny. "Can you ride?" he asked. Cordelia eyed the animal warily. "I've had a few lessons, nothing extensive. Penny's even-tempered," he assured her. "We'll take it slow." With Nathan's help, she managed to mount the horse, though her long skirt made it awkward. Nathan swung easily onto Diablo, and they set off at a walking pace, Scout racing ahead excitedly. "The ranch covers about 5,000 acres, Nathan explained as they rode. "Not as big as some, but the water rights make it valuable. We run mostly Hereford cattle, good meat producers that handle the heat better than most breeds." Throughout the morning, Cordelia received a crash course in ranching. Nathan showed her how the cattle were managed in different pastures depending on the season, explained the complex system of water distribution through irrigation ditches from the creek, and pointed out the subtle signs of healthy versus stressed grazing land. "The secret to ranching isn't just raising cattle," he told her as they paused atop a small rise overlooking a portion of the herd. "It's understanding the land, what it can give and what it needs in return. Push it too hard, take too much, and it will fail you when you need it most." There was a quiet passion in his voice that Cordelia hadn't heard before, a deep connection to this place that went beyond mere ownership. They rode to where Frank and the other hands were checking on the pregnant heifer. The animal had indeed delivered a healthy calf during the night, and the men were branding the newborn with the sterling mark, a simple S with a horizontal line through it. "New life is always worth celebrating out here," Nathan said, as they watched the calf wobble to its feet and seek its mother. "Every healthy birth means the ranch has a future." By midday, Cordelia's muscles ached from the unaccustomed riding, and her fair skin had begun to redden despite the borrowed hat Nathan had insisted she wear. They stopped at a shady spot by the creek for a simple lunch of cold biscuits and jerky. "You're doing well," Nathan commented as she eased herself down from Penny with a barely suppressed groan. "Most city folk would have complained hours ago." "I'm saving my complaints for a more dramatic moment," she replied with a small smile. "Perhaps when I can no longer walk tomorrow." A surprised laugh escaped him, the first true laugh she'd heard from him, revealing a flash of straight white teeth against his tanned skin. The sound transformed his face, softening the stern lines and brightening his storm-gray eyes. "I'll remember to have a hot bath ready," he said, the hint of a smile lingering at the corners of his mouth. The simple exchange felt like a small victory, a crack in the careful reserve they'd both maintained. As they sat in the dappled shade, the gentle murmur of the creek creating a peaceful backdrop, Cordelia felt a tentative connection forming between them. "Tell me about Boston," Nathan said unexpectedly. "Your letters mentioned it, but not much about your life there." Cordelia hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. In her letters, she had presented a somewhat sanitized version of her circumstances, acknowledging her orphaned state and limited prospects. but not detailing the desperate poverty that had driven her to consider becoming a mail-order bride. "After my father died, things changed quickly," she began carefully. "The business debts were substantial. The house, the furnishings, everything had to be sold. My mother and I moved to a small room in a boarding house, and I found work as a seamstress in a dress shop." She glanced at her hands, the small scars from countless needle pricks visible if one looked closely enough. "When Mother fell ill, the doctor's bills accumulated. After she passed, I couldn't maintain even our modest accommodations on my wages alone." Nathan listened silently, his expression giving nothing away. "The shop owner's wife suggested I consider advertisements seeking brides for Western settlers," Cordelia continued. "She showed me the newspaper where I found your notice. It seemed providential." "So you came west out of necessity, not choice," Nathan said quietly. "Yes," she admitted, "though I'd like to think I would have had the courage to seek adventure even without financial pressures. And now that you're here, what do you think of your adventure so far?" His tone was light, but his eyes watched her closely. Cordelia considered the question seriously. "It's overwhelming," she said honestly. "The landscape, the work, the people, everything is so different from what I've known. But there's something compelling about it. A kind of freedom I never experienced in Boston, despite all its supposed civilization." Nathan nodded slowly. "That's what drew me west after the war. In Virginia, everywhere I looked reminded me of what was lost. Out here, a man can build something new. You fought in the war?" Cordelia asked, realizing how little she really knew about this man she had agreed to marry. 4 years with the 12th Virginia Infantry," he said, his voice neutral. "Enlisted at 18, came home at 22 with nothing much to show for it except scars and memories I'd rather forget." The revelation explained much about his reserved nature and the shadows that sometimes darkened his eyes. Like many veterans, he carried invisible wounds alongside the physical ones. "I'm sorry," she said simply, knowing that no other words would suffice. He shrugged one shoulder. "It was a lifetime ago." Changing the subject deliberately, he asked, "What about your skills? You mentioned sewing and cooking in your letters. Anything else you're good at?" "I can read and write well enough," she said. "My father insisted on education for both my brother and me. I'm reasonably competent with figures. I kept the books for his business toward the end, and I know some basic nursing from caring for my mother." "Your brother?" Nathan asked. "You never mentioned him before." Cordelia's expression clouded. "James. He went west before father died. California gold fields. We received 2 letters, then nothing. That was 5 years ago." "I'm sorry," Nathan echoed her earlier sentiment, understanding in his eyes. "The West has a way of swallowing men whole sometimes." The moment of shared confidences created a new ease between them as they remounted and continued their tour of the ranch. Nathan showed her the boundaries where his property met neighboring ranches, explaining the complex relationships that existed between the area's cattle operations. "Carmichael to the north is decent enough, though his sons are troublemakers. Watson to the east is fair in business. The double bar to the south is run by Harlan Reed, best avoided when possible." "Why is that?" Cordelia asked. Nathan's expression darkened. "Reed believes in expansion by any means necessary. Several smaller ranchers have mysteriously decided to sell to him after accidents befell their operations. Nothing ever proven, but—" "I understand," Cordelia said. The concept of powerful men using intimidation to get their way was not foreign to her. Such things happened in Boston too, though perhaps with more subtlety. By late afternoon, when they returned to the ranch house, Cordelia was exhausted but exhilarated. The vastness of the operation had begun to make sense to her, the careful balance of resources. the constant vigilance required, the deep knowledge of both animals and land needed to survive in this harsh environment. True to his word, Nathan had a bath prepared for her, a luxury she hadn't expected. The large copper tub was positioned in her bedroom, screened from the door by a simple folding partition. The warm water was heaven on her aching muscles. Afterward, she changed into her second plainest dress, grimacing at how unsuitable even this garment was for ranch life. If she were to stay, she would need to create a new wardrobe from scratch, something practical yet feminine. That evening, after a hearty dinner with Nathan and Frank, Cordelia retired early, her body demanding rest. Through the thin walls of the bedroom, she could hear the low murmur of men's voices as Nathan and Frank discussed the next day's work. There was something comforting about the sound, a reminder that she was not alone in this strange new world. The next few days fell into a pattern. Each morning, Cordelia rose at dawn and helped prepare breakfast. Then, while Nathan and the ranch hands tended to the cattle and other essential operations, she turned her attention to the house. It was clean but Spartan, lacking the small touches that transformed a building into a home. She swept and dusted, rearranged furniture for better flow, and took inventory of household supplies. In a chest in the main room, she discovered a stack of faded curtains that, with some mending, could serve to soften the harsh sunlight in the windows. She also found a few books, practical manuals on cattle breeding and desert agriculture, a Bible, and surprisingly, a worn volume of Shakespeare's sonnets. On the fourth day, Nathan returned from town with supplies, including several lengths of sturdy cotton fabric in practical colors. "Thought you might need these," he said simply, placing the bundle on the table, "for clothes better suited to ranch life." The thoughtful gesture touched her. "Thank you," she said. "My Boston wardrobe is proving rather impractical." "There's a mercantile in town," he added. "Not much selection, but we could go there next week if you need other things." The mention of town reminded Cordelia of her humiliating arrival. "The townspeople, are they always so judgmental?" Nathan supplied when she hesitated. "Often. Vulture City was a booming mining town once. Now it's struggling. People get mean when times are hard. But you're doing well," Cordelia observed. "The ranch seems prosperous." Nathan's expression turned serious. "For now. But ranching has its cycles too. Good years, bad years. Drought, disease, falling beef prices, any of those could change everything." His honesty was refreshing. Many men would have painted a rosier picture to reassure a potential wife, but Nathan seemed determined that she understand both the rewards and risks of the life she was considering. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had fallen into naturally, Nathan brought up a topic they had both been carefully avoiding. "It's been almost a week," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Have you given any thought to our arrangement?" Cordelia's heart quickened. She had indeed thought of little else, weighing her options with careful deliberation. The ranch was hard work, the climate challenging, and the isolation significant. Yet there was beauty here too, and a sense of purpose that had been lacking in her Boston existence. And then, there was Nathan himself, reserved but fair, hardworking, and possessed of an integrity that showed in his actions more than his words. Not the husband of her girlhood dreams, perhaps, but a man she could respect. Maybe even, in time, care for deeply. "I have," she said, meeting his gaze steadily. "I would like to stay if you still want me to." Something flickered in his storm-gray eyes, relief, perhaps, or satisfaction. "I do," he said simply, "but I think we should wait a little longer before making it official. Give ourselves more time to be certain." His continued caution both frustrated and reassured her. It spoke of a man who took marriage seriously, who wouldn't enter into it lightly despite the practical advantages. "How much longer?" she asked. "Another week," he suggested. "If you still feel the same then, we'll ride into town and find the preacher." Cordelia nodded her agreement, a mixture of emotions washing through her: anticipation, nervousness, and a quiet determination to make this unexpected partnership work. The following days took on new significance as Cordelia committed herself fully to learning the rhythms and requirements of ranch life. She helped Frank preserve fruits and vegetables for the coming winter, learned to milk the ranch's 2 dairy cows, and even attempted to make cheese using a recipe Frank's mother had taught him years ago. Nathan began teaching her to ride properly, replacing her awkward side saddle position with a more practical astride seat that scandalized her Boston sensibilities, but made far more sense for ranch work. He was a patient teacher, never showing frustration when she struggled, offering quiet encouragement when she succeeded. On the 5th day after their conversation, disaster struck. Cordelia was hanging the mended curtains when Frank burst through the door, his weathered face grim. "Where's the boss?" he demanded without preamble. "Checking the north pasture fences," Cordelia replied, alarmed by his expression. "What's happened?" "Water's been diverted from the creek," Frank said tersely. "Someone built a dam upstream on Reed's property. Our irrigation ditches are running dry." "Reed?" "The neighboring rancher Nathan mentioned," Frank nodded grimly. "Been trying to buy this land for years. Boss won't sell. Looks like Reed's decided to force the issue. Without water, the cattle couldn't survive and neither could the ranch. It was a death sentence delivered by human hands rather than nature." "What can we do?" Cordelia asked, her mind racing. "Not much legally," Frank admitted. "Reed will claim he's just managing his own water resources. By the time we could get a judge out here to rule on water rights, the herd would be half dead." When Nathan returned and heard the news, his reaction was controlled but intense. A muscle jumped in his jaw and his eyes turned the color of thunderclouds. "Get the men," he told Frank. "We're riding up to the dam tonight." "Nathan," Cordelia said hesitantly, "is that wise, if Reed has done this deliberately?" "He'll be expecting us," Nathan finished for her. "I know, but we don't have a choice. Without water, everything I've built dies." The gravity of the situation settled over her. This wasn't just about inconvenience or property disputes, it was about survival. "What can I do?" she asked. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. "Keep a lamp burning," he said finally, "and have bandages ready just in case." As dusk fell, Nathan and 4 ranch hands, including Frank, rode out, rifles across their saddles. Cordelia watched them disappear into the gathering darkness, fear clutching at her throat. She had known ranch life would be demanding, but she hadn't expected to face potential violence within her first weeks. The hours crept by with excruciating slowness. Cordelia prepared bandages as instructed, boiled water, and laid out Nathan's small supply of medical equipment: alcohol, needle and thread for stitches, herb poultices for inflammation. Then she waited, jumping at every sound outside. It was past midnight when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She rushed to the door, lamp in hand, her heart pounding. The riders emerged from the darkness, all 5 men returning, apparently unharmed. Relief flooded through her, but as they drew closer, she saw that Nathan was slumped forward in his saddle, supported by Frank, who rode beside him. His shirt was dark with what could only be blood. "Get the table cleared," Frank called to her, his voice tight with tension. He took a bullet. The next hours were a blur of frantic activity. Nathan was conscious but pale with pain and blood loss as they eased him onto the kitchen table. The bullet had struck his left shoulder, thankfully missing vital organs but causing significant damage. Reed's men were waiting for us, Frank explained tersely as Cordelia helped cut away Nathan's blood-soaked shirt. Ambushed us as we approached the dam. We managed to blow it anyway, water's flowing again, but at a price. Cordelia forced down her panic, drawing on the skills she'd developed caring for her mother. With Frank's assistance, she cleaned the wound, determined that the bullet had passed through rather than lodging in the flesh, and stitched both entry and exit wounds with neat, careful sutures. Throughout the procedure, Nathan remained grimly silent, his jaw clenched against the pain, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. When the wound was bandaged and Nathan had been moved to her bedroom, Cordelia finally allowed herself to tremble. The reality of Western justice, or the lack thereof, had been brutally demonstrated. This wasn't Boston, where law enforcement might be corrupt but was at least present. Here, men made their own law with guns and determination. Will Reed retaliate? She asked Frank as they cleaned up the bloody cloths and instruments. The foreman's expression was grim. Eventually, but he won't move again right away, too obvious even for him. We've bought some time. And Nathan, boss is strong, Frank said. He'll heal if infection doesn't set in. That's the real danger now. For the next 3 days, Cordelia barely left Nathan's side. She changed his bandages, coaxed him to drink willow bark tea for pain and fever, and bathed his brow when infection did indeed set in, bringing with it restless delirium. During these episodes, fragments of Nathan's past emerged, confused murmurings about battlefields and fallen comrades, occasional calls for his mother, and once, heartbreakingly, a clear apology to someone named Thomas. Frank managed the ranch operations, reporting in each evening. The cattle were safe, the water flowing freely again, but everyone remained vigilant for further trouble from Reed. On the 4th night, Nathan's fever finally broke. Cordelia, dozing in a chair beside the bed, woke to find him watching her, his eyes clear for the first time in days. "You're still here," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Of course I am," she replied, moving to help him take a sip of water. "Where else would I be?" "Halfway back to Boston, maybe," he suggested, a ghost of his dry humor returning. "Most women don't sign up for gunfights and nursing bullet wounds." "Most women aren't me," Cordelia said simply. His eyes held hers for a long moment. "No," he agreed softly, "they're not." Something shifted between them in that moment, a deepening of the tentative connection that had been forming. In caring for him, seeing him at his most vulnerable, Cordelia had crossed a boundary. And in accepting her care, Nathan had revealed a trust that went beyond their practical arrangement. As Nathan recovered, regaining strength gradually, their relationship continued to evolve. He was a difficult patient, frustrated by his enforced inactivity and the weakness of his healing body. But he accepted Cordelia's care with a grudging grace that occasionally gave way to moments of surprising openness. One evening, as she changed his bandages, he finally spoke about the war, not the sanitized version he had offered before, but the raw truth of a young man thrust into unimaginable horror. "Thomas was my brother," he said abruptly, staring at the ceiling. "Younger by 2 years. He followed me into the 12th Virginia. I promised our mother I'd look after him." Cordelia's hands stilled momentarily, understanding that he was sharing something precious and painful. "Gettysburg," Nathan continued, his voice distant. "3rd day, we were part of Pickett's charge. Thomas was beside me when the Federal artillery opened up. One moment he was there, the next. He swallowed hard. There wasn't enough left to bury." "I'm so sorry," Cordelia whispered, understanding now the weight he carried, the survivor's guilt that had driven him west, away from reminders of all he had lost. "After that, there didn't seem much point in caution," he admitted. I volunteered for the most dangerous assignments, hoping maybe I'd join him, but death has a way of avoiding those who seek it out. And now, she asked quietly, are you still seeking it? His eyes met hers, something vulnerable in their depths. No, he said, not for a long time now. The admission felt significant, a door opening between them that had previously been closed. In the days that followed, as Nathan began to move around the house and eventually outside for short periods, their conversations continued to deepen, revealing the people behind the careful facades they had both maintained. A week after the shooting, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Nathan turned to her with unexpected directness. The week I asked for is long past, he said. Have you changed your mind about staying? Cordelia considered the question seriously. The dangers of ranch life had been starkly demonstrated, the isolation and hardship made clear. Yet in that same time, she had discovered strengths within herself she hadn't known existed, and glimpsed in Nathan a man of complexity and worth. No, she said firmly, I want to stay. Not just because I have nowhere else to go, but because I choose this place, and you. Something like wonder crossed his face. Even after everything, especially after everything, she replied. In Boston I existed, here I feel alive. The confession hung between them, honest and unadorned. Nathan reached out slowly as if giving her time to pull away and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused, warm against her skin. Then when I'm well enough to ride to town, we'll find that preacher, he said. If you're certain. I am, she assured him, finding that it was true. The prospect of becoming Mrs. Nathan Sterling no longer felt like a practical necessity, but a chosen path, one that held the promise of partnership rather than mere security. 3 weeks after the shooting, Nathan was well enough to travel to town. Cordelia rode beside him, wearing a dress she had fashioned from the fabric he had brought her, practical for riding but with feminine touches that honored the occasion. Her copper hair was pinned neatly beneath a wide-brimmed hat that protected her fair skin from the relentless Arizona sun. As they approached Vulture City, Cordelia felt a flutter of anxiety. Her last visit had been less than welcoming, and she wondered what reception awaited them now. The town looked much as it had on her arrival, dusty, sun-bleached, and clinging to existence despite the declining fortunes of its mines. But this time, Cordelia viewed it through different eyes. She was no longer a vulnerable Easterner at the mercy of strangers, but a woman who had chosen this harsh land and found strength within its challenges. They tied their horses outside the mercantile first. Need to pick up a few things, Nathan explained, helping her down from her mount. His left arm was still weaker than before, but healing well. Inside, the storekeeper, a heavy-set man with suspicious eyes, greeted Nathan with grudging respect. Sterling, heard you had some trouble with Reed. Nothing that couldn't be handled, Nathan replied neutrally. The storekeeper's gaze shifted to Cordelia, recognition dawning. Your mail-order bride. Thought she might have run back east by now. Mrs. Sterling soon enough, Nathan corrected, a protective edge to his voice that Cordelia found surprisingly touching. The man's eyebrows rose. That's so. Well, congratulations, I suppose. His tone suggested he still doubted her staying power. Nathan made his purchases efficiently: coffee, sugar, ammunition, and unexpectedly, a small package he tucked into his pocket without explanation. Then they proceeded to the church, a simple wooden structure at the edge of town. The preacher, Reverend Miller, was a thin, earnest man who seemed genuinely pleased to perform the ceremony. Not many weddings these days, he explained as he readied his Bible. More funerals than anything else. It's good to celebrate life for a change. The ceremony was brief and unadorned, witnessed only by the Reverend's wife and an elderly church deacon. Cordelia wore no veil, carried no flowers, but as she spoke her vows in a clear, steady voice, she felt a sense of rightness that transcended such traditional trappings. Nathan's responses were equally firm, his eyes never leaving hers as he promised to protect and cherish her, till death do us part. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan hesitated only a moment before leaning down to place a gentle kiss on her lips there first. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through Cordelia, a promise of intimacies to come that both thrilled and unnerved her. Nathan's eyes, when he pulled away, held a similar awareness, a recognition of the boundary they had crossed from arrangement to marriage in truth. As they left the church, Cordelia noticed a small crowd had gathered outside, many of the same faces that had laughed at her arrival weeks ago. But this time, their expressions held more curiosity than mockery. She held her head high, Nathan's hand warm at the small of her back as they walked to their horses. "Didn't think you'd stick it out, Boston," called a woman Cordelia recognized from her arrival day. "Especially after what happened with Reed." "Life in Arizona has proven more interesting than I anticipated," Cordelia replied evenly. A ripple of surprised laughter went through the onlookers. Before anyone could respond, Nathan had helped her onto her horse and they were riding out of town, leaving the curious stares behind. When they were well away from town, Nathan guided them on a different route than the direct path back to the ranch. "Thought we might take the scenic way home," he explained when she questioned the detour. The trail led them higher into the foothills, winding through groves of mesquite and palo verde trees. Eventually, they reached a natural plateau overlooking a vast expanse of desert. Below them, the land stretched away in all directions, painted in shades of gold and russet by the late afternoon sun. In the distance, the Sterling Ranch was visible, a small cluster of buildings that represented everything they had both committed to. Nathan dismounted and helped Cordelia down, then reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth bread, cheese, and dried fruit, along with a bottle of wine that must have cost dearly in this remote location. "Not much of a wedding feast," he said with a hint of apology. "But I thought we deserved something special." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. "It's perfect," she assured him. They spread the cloth on a flat rock and shared the simple meal, the landscape providing a more magnificent backdrop than any dining room in Boston could offer. As they ate, Nathan reached into his pocket and withdrew the small package he had purchased in town. "I have something for you," he said, a rare uncertainty in his voice. "It's not much, and if you don't like it—" He handed her the package, watching as she carefully unwrapped it to reveal a simple gold band with a small pearl set into the metal. "It was the best they had at the Mercantile," he explained. "Not what you might have had in Boston, but it's beautiful," Cordelia interrupted, genuinely moved by the gesture. She had not expected a ring at all, understanding the practical nature of their arrangement. Nathan took the ring and slipped it onto her finger, his touch gentle. "I want to do this right," he said quietly. "You deserve that much." The pearl gleamed softly in the late afternoon light, a small perfect thing amidst the wildness around them. Like their marriage, Cordelia thought something precious and unexpected found in the harshest of environments. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in spectacular hues of crimson and gold, Nathan drew her to her feet and into his arms. This second kiss was different from the brief contact in the church, deeper, more certain, a declaration of intent rather than a ceremonial gesture. When they broke apart, Cordelia saw in his eyes all the words he struggled to express: desire, respect, and a tentative tenderness that matched her own confused emotions. They were still learning each other, still navigating the transition from strangers bound by convenience to partners united by choice. But in that moment, under the vast Arizona sky, the path forward seemed clearer than ever before. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them absorbed in private thoughts and the awareness of what awaited them. At the ranch house, Frank and the Hands had prepared a small celebration, a feast of roast beef and potatoes, with an actual cake somehow procured for the occasion. "Can't have a wedding without cake," Frank declared with a wink. "Even out here in the middle of nowhere." The gesture was touching, these rough men making an effort to honor the occasion in the only way they knew how. After the meal, as darkness fell, the Hands discreetly retreated to the bunkhouse, leaving Cordelia and Nathan alone for the first time as husband and wife. The awareness of what that meant hung in the air between them as they moved around the kitchen, clearing dishes with careful politeness. When the last plate was dried and put away, Nathan finally spoke. "I've moved my things into the bedroom," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "But if you'd prefer more time." Cordelia appreciated the consideration, the lack of assumption, but she was determined to begin their marriage honestly. "We are husband and wife now," she said steadily, meeting his gaze. "In all ways." Something flickered in his eyes, relief, desire, and perhaps a touch of nervousness that matched her own. He offered his hand, and she took it, allowing him to lead her to what was now their shared bedroom. What followed was a discovery, tentative at first, then with growing confidence as they learned each other's bodies and responses. Nathan was gentle, attentive, treating her with a reverence that made her feel both cherished and desired. In turn, Cordelia set aside her Boston propriety, embracing this most intimate aspect of their partnership with the same courage she had shown in facing the challenges of ranch life. Afterward, lying in his arms as moonlight filtered through the curtains she had mended, Cordelia felt a sense of peace she had not expected. Their marriage might have begun as a practical arrangement, but it had already become something far more meaningful, a genuine partnership forged in shared challenges and mutual respect. "What are you thinking?" Nathan asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. Cordelia smiled in the darkness. "That the town may have laughed when I arrived as your mail-order bride, but I think I may have the last laugh after all." His arms tightened around her. "They don't matter," he said. "Only this does, only us." "Us," she repeated, liking the sound of the word on her tongue. Nathan and Cordelia Sterling. In that moment, the vast distance between Boston and Arizona seemed to vanish, the differences in their backgrounds insignificant compared to the bond they were building. Together they had faced danger, overcome prejudice, and chosen each other despite the odds. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whether from Harlan Reed's enmity, the harsh demands of the land, or the adjustments of two independent people learning to share a life, they would face them as partners. As she drifted toward sleep, Cordelia's last thought was that sometimes the most unlikely journeys led to exactly where one was meant to be all along. The seasons changed, and with them, Cordelia's understanding of ranch life deepened. Summer's brutal heat gave way to fall's gentler warmth, bringing with it new challenges and rhythms. The cattle drive to the railhead in Tucson, Nathan's first, since his injury kept him away for 2 weeks, during which Cordelia managed the homestead with growing confidence. Under Frank's guidance, she learned to recognize the signs of approaching storms, to distinguish between harmless snakes and dangerous ones, to gauge how much water the garden needed by the feel of soil between her fingers. Harlan Reed remained a shadow over their happiness, though he made no further overt moves against the ranch. "He's waiting," Nathan explained one evening, "for me to make a mistake or for nature to turn against us. Drought, disease, anything that might weaken us enough to force a sale. But that fall brought adequate rain, and the herd remained healthy. The ranch prospered enough that Nathan was able to hire 2 additional hands, increasing security and allowing for improvements to the property that had long been postponed. Cordelia took charge of these improvements, directing the building of a proper chicken coop, expanding the kitchen garden with drought-resistant plants she'd researched, and transforming the Spartan house into a true home. Colorful woven rugs purchased from local Native American artisans warmed the wooden floors. Shelves Nathan built held books ordered from catalogs, not just practical manuals now, but poetry, history, and novels they read aloud to each other on winter evenings. Their marriage deepened with the passing months, initial attraction maturing into genuine love. Nathan remained a man of few words, but he found ways to express his feelings through actions, bringing her wildflowers he found while checking fence lines, carving a rocking chair for the porch where they spent evening hours, listening with genuine interest to her ideas about ranch improvements. In turn, Cordelia learned to read his silences, to understand the weight of responsibility he carried for the land and people under his care. She became his true partner, keeping the ranch accounts, with the bookkeeping skills she'd learned from her father, nursing injured ranch hands, representing sterling ranch interests at community gatherings when Nathan was occupied elsewhere. The town's attitude toward her shifted gradually. The women who had mocked her arrival began to seek her company, intrigued by her Eastern education and impressed by her adaptation to Western life. Cordelia balanced friendliness with caution, never forgetting those initial cruelties, but willing to build bridges where possible. "You've won them over," Nathan observed after the town's Thanksgiving gathering, where Cordelia's pumpkin pies had been the most praised desserts on the communal table. "Not all of them," she replied realistically, "but enough that I no longer feel like a complete outsider." "You're more Arizona than Boston now," he teased, brushing a strand of copper hair from her face. The sun and wind had gilded her fair skin to a light tan, and her hands showed evidence of ranch work despite the gloves she wore for the harshest tasks. But the transformation went deeper than physical appearance. She carried herself with a confidence born of overcoming challenges, of finding strength she hadn't known she possessed. As winter descended, bringing surprisingly cold temperatures to the high desert, Cordelia and Nathan settled into a peaceful routine. Mornings began before dawn with shared coffee by the cookstove's warmth, followed by the day's necessary work. Evenings were spent in quiet companionship, planning for the ranch's future, occasionally entertaining Frank or neighboring ranchers who had become friends. In late January, during a rare snowfall that dusted the desert like powdered sugar, Cordelia made a discovery that changed everything. She had been feeling unusually tired for weeks, with occasional bouts of nausea in the mornings. The symptoms, combined with other changes she had noticed, led to only one conclusion. She waited until evening to tell Nathan, when they were alone in the warm cocoon of their bedroom. "I believe I'm going to have a baby," she said, watching his face carefully. "Sometime in late summer, I think." Nathan went utterly still, his expression frozen. For a terrible moment, Cordelia feared she had misread him completely, that he didn't want children, or at least not yet while the ranch required so much of their attention. Then his face transformed, wonder breaking through his usual reserve like sunlight through clouds. "A baby," he repeated, his voice hushed. "Our baby." He reached for her, drawing her gently into his arms, his hand moving to rest protectively over her still flat stomach. "Are you happy about this?" he asked, searching her face. "Very happy," she assured him, relief flooding through her. though also a little frightened. Vulture City is a long way from proper doctors. We'll get you the best care possible, he promised immediately. There's a good doctor in Tucson. We'll make arrangements for you to be there well before your time. His protective instinct was touching but also slightly amusing. Nathan, women have been having babies in remote places since the beginning of time. I'm not made of porcelain. No, he agreed, a smile touching his lips. You're made of something far stronger, but humor me in this, please. I want everything to be perfect for both of you. As news of the pregnancy spread, the ranch took on an atmosphere of joyful anticipation. Frank, who had never married or had children of his own, became almost comically protective of Cordelia, insisting on carrying even the lightest loads and constantly offering advice gleaned from his numerous nieces and nephews. The women of Vulture City embraced the news with genuine warmth, organizing a quilting circle to create a baby blanket and offering practical suggestions for managing motherhood in the challenging desert environment. Even the storekeeper, who had been so dismissive of Cordelia initially, set aside especially fine baby items that came through his establishment. Nathan channeled his excitement into practical preparations. He expanded their bedroom to create a nursery alcove, constructed a sturdy crib with his own hands, and built a series of shelves for baby supplies. When not working, his hand would often rest gently on Cordelia's growing belly, his expression one of amazement when he felt the baby move. As spring transformed the desert with a brief, spectacular blooming of wildflowers, the ranch continued to prosper. Nathan's careful breeding program was paying dividends in healthy calves, and his reputation for quality cattle was spreading throughout the territory. There were even tentative plans to purchase additional land from a neighboring rancher who was returning east due to his wife's health. But beneath the surface of their happiness, Harlan Reed remained a constant concern. Reports from town suggested he was facing financial difficulties, making him potentially more dangerous. A desperate man with a grudge was unpredictable. We need to be vigilant, Nathan warned the ranch hands. Extra guards were posted at night, and no one rode the boundaries alone. Despite these precautions, trouble found them as spring gave way to early summer. Cordelia, now visibly pregnant, was in the garden when she heard gunshots from the direction of the north pasture. Her heart froze in her chest. Frank came running from the barn. "Get inside," he ordered tersely. "Bar the door. Don't open it for anyone but me or the boss." Inside the house, Cordelia paced anxiously, one hand resting on her swollen belly where the baby kicked vigorously, perhaps sensing her distress. Through the windows, she could see ranch hands riding toward the sound of gunfire, rifles ready. An hour passed with excruciating slowness. Finally, the sound of hoofbeats announced their return. Peering cautiously through the window, Cordelia saw Nathan dismounting, apparently unharmed. She rushed to unbar the door. "Rustlers," he explained grimly as he entered. "Reed's men, almost certainly, though they wore masks. They got away with about 20 head. But everyone's all right?" Cordelia asked, scanning him for injuries. Martinez took a bullet in the arm, nothing serious. "Doc Jenkins is seeing to him now." Nathan ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his gesture. "This is just the beginning. Reed's testing us, seeing how we respond. The next few weeks proved him right." Small incidents accumulated a section of fence cut, allowing cattle to wander onto Reed's property where they were then claimed as his own. A mysterious fire in a haystack that was fortunately discovered before it could spread. Poisoned water in one of the outlying stock ponds that killed several valuable steers. Each attack was carefully calculated to cause damage while remaining just ambiguous enough to prevent direct legal action. The local sheriff, an elderly man more interested in peaceful retirement than confrontation with powerful ranchers, offered little support. "Can't prove it was Raid," he said with a shrug when Nathan reported the rustling. "Could have been Apache, could have been drifters." The tension took its toll on everyone. Nathan slept little, his face becoming leaner and more drawn as he worked to maintain vigilance while still managing the ranch's daily operations. Cordelia worried for him, for their unborn child, for the future they had been building so carefully. The breaking point came in late June. Nathan had ridden to a neighboring ranch to discuss mutual security measures, leaving Frank in charge. Cordelia was resting during the hottest part of the day when she heard an unusual commotion outside, men's voices raised in anger. Then sudden silence. Before she could investigate, the door burst open. 3 men stood there, bandanas pulled up to cover the lower half of their faces, guns drawn. Behind them, she glimpsed Frank and one of the ranch hands face down in the dirt, hands bound behind their backs. "Mrs. Sterling," the leader said, his voice mocking, "you're coming with us. Mr. Reed would like a word." Fear clutched at Cordelia's heart, but she forced herself to remain outwardly calm. "As you can see," she said, gesturing to her advanced pregnancy, "I'm in no condition for social calls." "Wasn't asking," the man replied coldly. "Now move, or things get unpleasant for your ranch hands out there." With no real choice, Cordelia allowed herself to be escorted outside and helped onto a horse. The leader mounted behind her, ensuring she couldn't escape. As they rode away, she cast one desperate glance back at Frank, who was struggling against his bonds, fury in his eyes. They rode for nearly an hour, heading toward the Double Bar Ranch. The baby moved restlessly within her, as if sensing her distress. Cordelia murmured soothing words, as much to calm herself as her unborn child. Finally, they arrived at Reed's ranch house, an ostentatious 2-story structure that stood in stark contrast to the modest homes of most area ranchers. Cordelia was escorted inside and into a study where Harlan Reed sat behind a massive desk. Reed was in his 50s, heavy-set with small, calculating eyes and an expression of perpetual dissatisfaction. He rose as she entered, a mockery of gentlemanly behavior. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit down. In your condition, you should be careful." "You seem very concerned about my welfare," Cordelia replied coldly, remaining standing. "Yet you had me kidnapped and brought here against my will." Reed's false smile faded. "Sit down," he repeated, his tone hardening. "This needn't be unpleasant." Recognizing the futility of defiance in her current situation, Cordelia took the offered seat. "What do you want, Mr. Reed?" "The same thing I've wanted for years," he said bluntly. "Sterling Ranch." "Your husband has been uncooperative. Perhaps you'll be more reasonable." "If you think I have any influence over my husband's business decisions, you're mistaken," Cordelia lied smoothly. In truth, she and Nathan had discussed every aspect of the ranch's operations together since their marriage. Reed studied her with those small, shrewd eyes. "Oh, I think he'll be quite influenced by your situation. You see, Mrs. Sterling, I'm offering him a simple choice: the ranch or his wife and unborn child." Cordelia felt cold fear wash over her, but she maintained her composure. "That sounds remarkably like a threat, Mr. Reed." "Call it what you like," he shrugged. "The fact remains, Sterling will sign over his water rights and his best grazing land if he wants to see you again." He pulled out a document from his desk drawer. "It's all prepared, just needs his signature." "And if he refuses?" Cordelia asked, already knowing the answer. Reed's smile was chilling. "Then I'm afraid there might be an unfortunate accident. These things happen in the territory. A woman alone lost in the desert. Such a tragedy." Cordelia's mind raced. Reed clearly intended to use her as leverage to force Nathan's hand, then likely dispose of both of them once he had what he wanted. The ranch had always been his target. They were merely obstacles. "My husband won't take this lightly," she warned, stalling for time. "He has friends in the territory, powerful friends." Reed laughed dismissively. "Your husband is a moderately successful small rancher with delusions of grandeur. No one will go to war for him." He rose from his desk. "My men are already on their way to Sterling Ranch with the papers. They'll explain the situation." A commotion outside interrupted whatever Reed planned to say next. Shouts, then gunfire, followed by the thunder of hoofbeats approaching rapidly. Reed cursed, yanking open a desk drawer and pulling out a revolver. "Stay where you are," he ordered Cordelia, moving to the window. Taking advantage of his distraction, Cordelia searched desperately for anything that might serve as a weapon. On a side table, she spotted a heavy brass paperweight. She seized it just as the front door crashed open. Reed spun toward the sound, raising his gun. Without hesitation, Cordelia hurled the paperweight with all her strength, striking him in the back of the head. He staggered, the gun wavering in his hand. In that moment, Nathan burst through the study door, his own revolver leveled at Reed. Behind him came Frank and several other figures Cordelia didn't immediately recognize. "Drop it, Reed," Nathan commanded, his voice deadly quiet. "Or the next bullet's between your eyes." Reed, blood trickling from where the paperweight had struck him, seemed to calculate his odds. Finding them unfavorable, he slowly lowered his weapon. "This is private property, Sterling," he blustered. "You're trespassing." "And you're holding my wife against her will," Nathan replied, his eyes never leaving Reed's face. "That's kidnapping, hanging a fence in this territory." One of the men behind Nathan stepped forward, a lean, hard-faced individual wearing a silver star. "I'm Marshal Dawson, Territorial Law. Been investigating you for some time, Reed. Seems like you've finally given us something we can act on." Reed's face contorted with rage. "This is absurd. The woman came here voluntarily." "That true, Mrs. Sterling?" the marshal asked, turning to Cordelia. "It most certainly is not," Cordelia replied firmly. "I was taken at gunpoint from my home, threatened, and told my husband would be forced to sign over our ranch if he wanted to see me alive again." The marshal nodded grimly. "That'll do." He gestured to the men with him. "Take him into custody. We'll sort this out properly in Tucson." As Reed was led away, protesting vociferously, Nathan rushed to Cordelia's side, gathering her carefully into his arms. "Are you hurt? The baby?" "We're both fine," she assured him, leaning into his strength. "How did you know where to find me?" "One of the hands got free and rode to meet me," Nathan explained. "I was already on my way back with Marshal Dawson. He's been building a case against Reed for months, interviewing ranchers who have been pressured to sell. Your kidnapping was the final evidence he needed." Frank appeared in the doorway, a relieved grin splitting his weathered face. "Mrs. Sterling, gave us quite a scare, you did." "It wasn't entirely intentional," she replied dryly, which provoked a chuckle from the men. The ride back to Sterling Ranch was slow and careful, Nathan insisting that Cordelia travel in Reed's own buggy for comfort. By the time they arrived, word of Reed's arrest had spread, and several neighboring ranchers had gathered at the house, offering support and bringing food as was the Western custom in times of crisis. That evening, after the visitors had departed and Cordelia had rested, she and Nathan sat on the porch in their accustomed places, watching the sunset paint the desert in glorious color. "I thought I might lose you today," Nathan said quietly, his hand holding hers with gentle intensity. "Both of you. For a while, so did I," Cordelia admitted. But I knew you would come. Always, he promised, the single word carrying the weight of absolute certainty. They sat in companionable silence for a time, processing the day's events. Finally, Cordelia spoke the question that had been troubling her. What happens now? With Reed gone, is the ranch safe? Nathan considered before answering. Reed will face territorial justice. With the marshal's evidence and your testimony, he'll likely go to prison for a long time. His ranch will probably be sold off. He has Eastern investors who won't want to be associated with his crimes. And the men who worked for him. Some were just hired guns who'll move on. Others were ordinary ranch hands who needed work and will find it elsewhere. He squeezed her hand reassuringly. The worst of the danger is past. The baby chose that moment to kick vigorously, as if in agreement. Cordelia laughed, guiding Nathan's hand to feel the movement. His face softened with wonder, as it always did when he felt their child stir. I think he or she is ready for a more peaceful life, Cordelia said. I hope so, Nathan replied. Though in my experience, peace in Arizona territory is always a relative term. 2 months later, as August heat shimmered across the desert, Cordelia gave birth to a healthy boy. True to his word, Nathan had arranged for her to be in Tucson for the delivery, under the care of the territory's most respected doctor. The labor was long but uncomplicated, and when it was over, Cordelia held in her arms a perfect infant with a dusting of copper hair like her own and eyes that already hinted at his father's storm gray color. What shall we call him? Nathan asked, his voice hushed with awe as he gazed down at his son. Cordelia had been considering names for months, weighing options that would honor both their families and the new life they had built together. Thomas James Sterling, she suggested, for your brother and for mine. Emotion flashed across Nathan's face, gratitude, love, and a healing of old wounds. It's perfect, he said, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. Hello, Thomas James. Welcome to the world. When they returned to the ranch 2 weeks later, they found that Frank and the Hands had prepared a surprise, a hand-painted sign over the main gate that read Sterling Ranch ESD. 1877, with the addition of a smaller line underneath. Home of the Sterling family. That simple gesture captured everything that had changed in the year since Cordelia had stepped off the stagecoach into the harsh Arizona sun. What had begun as a practical arrangement between strangers had transformed into a true family, bound by love rather than necessity. As Nathan helped her down from the wagon, baby Thomas cradled securely in her arms, Cordelia looked around at the ranch that had become her home. The house with its curtained windows and flowering cactus garden she had planted. The corrals where healthy cattle grazed. The distant mountains standing guard over their valley. And beside her, the man who had seen beyond her city manners and copper hair to the strength within, who had believed in her before she fully believed in herself. Welcome home, Nathan said softly, his arm around her waist. Home, Cordelia agreed, leaning into his embrace. The finest word in any language. As they crossed the threshold together, the Arizona sun warm on their backs, Cordelia reflected that sometimes the most unexpected journeys led to the most perfect destinations. The town had laughed when she arrived as a mail-order bride, but now she stood as the mistress of Sterling Ranch, wife to a man who had always seen her true worth, and mother to the next generation who would call this wild, beautiful land home. The laughter had faded long ago, replaced by something far more precious: respect, purpose, and a love that had bloomed like a desert flower, rare and extraordinary in its strength and beauty.